Hi everyone, this is Citlalli and I from the Mexica movement, and today I have a guest with me who is another member of the Mexica movement. His name is Huitzilyolotl and I, and today we want to address again one of the most common questions that I've been receiving, which is on the terms Hispanic or Latino. Just to kind of give you a little background to that, the organization, the Mexica movement, was one of the original organizations that started confronting and created a whole campaign against these colonial terms through Tezcatli Publications' work. If you guys are familiar with the shirts that say Mexican, Hispanic, Latino, that was originally designed by Tezcatli Publications, and you can now see them, the rip-off versions and the swap meets and all that stuff. However, even though a lot of our people are waking up and are starting to denounce those terms as colonial terms, we still see a heavy use of it in our communities. It's still all over Spanish-speaking media. We do not hear anything about being Mexican, Central American, let alone Indigenous. If we do, it's always obviously negative, racist. When they want to talk about negative aspects of our culture, of our community, they'll say Mexican, they'll say Salvadorian, but in general, it's always Hispanic or Latino. So to start off, Huitzilyolot's going to explain why we are not Latinos.
So Latino has this long history of taking pride of European ancestry. So the Europeans that were here, that were born here, they needed an identity. So they weren't considered, they weren't African, they weren't Nicantlaca. So they molded this identity. So Latino means Latin in English. So Latin obviously gives pride to Roman heritage, Roman culture, and so that's what they proclaim, because usually there were Southern Europeans. So they're relating their history to their their ethnicity, their identity as Latinos, as Latin people. So how that kind of affects us now, in the 1970s, you see this heavy use of marketing of the word Latino. So these Cuban and Puerto Rican executives basically came together and decided to lump Spanish-speaking people, whether they're Mexican, Salvadorian, Guatemalan, Puerto Rican, and they lumped them together. So that way they could maximize their profits. They could, they're marketing to one specific Spanish-speaking people. So that's where that comes from. That they're using our ignorance to maximize their profits, and so they're benefiting off our ignorance, because we don't know who we are. We don't know. We think, okay, Latino, okay, I speak Spanish, so it makes sense, but we don't know the history, but it's there when you read it. It clearly states what it means, what it was used for, and once you realize that, then you're like, well, no, I don't want to be Latino. I don't want to. You start to reject it, and especially in our communities, all of a sudden people are saying, oh, well, I'm Latino, and I was like, well, what does that mean? And usually they're Mexican or they're Salvadorian, but they don't want to say that. They don't want. It's like all of a sudden Mexican became this dirty, ugly word, and they want to seem more exotic or. Whatever the reason, they will say anything but Mexican, and it's kind of it's interesting when you're hanging out with people and we're all Mexican, and all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, we're Latinos, and it's like, no, we're Mexican, and people want to say, well, I want to be inclusive, I want to add everybody, but it's like, well, why are you saying Latino when we're all the same, we're all Mexican in one room, and there's not another group there. But even then, we don't realize that we are Indigenous or Nicantlaca, and so we have to be aware of once you're aware of it, you start to realize how it's constantly being used, even when it doesn't really need to be used. If people want to defend it, but it's like, well, why are you saying Mexican when we're all Mexican here? So we have to be aware of these terms, the history of it, why it's used, and once you realize it, then it's more easier to reject it and not be made a fool by the media.
Yeah, and it's really important because we have to remember that all of these terms were founded, were created based on the foundation of white supremacy. So through the process of colonization, part of stripping us from our land, stripping us from our culture, killing 95% of our people, those of us that survived were converted forcefully into their religions. We had to forcefully take on their names as their slaves. And so along with that comes speaking their languages. and our languages were forbidden. Our history was forbidden. I mean, there's laws that were created to keep us ignorant of our history. So it's no coincidence that now in the majority we do not know our history, like Huitzilyolotl was saying. And not only that, but we are speaking in their language, and they are forcing us to identify by the language that they forced us to speak. And so it's really ridiculous. When you know the history, it all makes sense. But in the system of white supremacy, you have no idea, no clue. It's normal. It's normal to us to speak the foreigner's language. It's normal to us to, be in self-hate. And we don't stop to think or try to identify ourselves based on something that gives us power. Because if you think like a white supremacist in their system, you do not want those people whom you are occupying, whom you are killing, whom you are stealing their resources. You don't want them to identify as the original people of the land that you are foreign to, that you invaded 5 centuries ago. So the logic of white supremacy makes sense. In the creation of these terms, there is an agenda behind it. People think, oh, it's just terms. It's all just, we all get united. We're just trying to unite everyone. Then you start to think, what do we have in common with Cubans, white Puerto Ricans? What does a Guatemalan that's 100% Nicantlaca indigenous have in common with a 100% white person from Cuba? Nothing besides the language. And that language is being used, like Huitzilyolotl said, as a marketing scheme. They want to group us all together. They want to take all of our dollars under one flag, because in colonialism, that's very profitable. And it's profitable, and it also keeps us really ignorant to who we are. And so part of the system of white supremacy, like I said, is to strip us of our culture, of our identity. And part of that is saying, the more we identify with them and their culture, the less we identify with ourselves, the less we connect to this land, the less we connect to our history, and the less you're going to want to even consider yourself indigenous or even reclaim this land. So the Europeans win. It's a win-win situation for them, whether they're the Spanish-speaking Europeans or the Northern-speaking Europeans, the English-speaking Europeans. So in us, with the organization, what we're trying to do is we're trying to deconstruct these terms and say it doesn't make sense when you're trying to instill pride in your people, when you're trying to reclaim who you are. Part of that process is to cleanse ourselves from all of their terms, because they have no right to define who we are. After they're the ones that invaded us, they're the ones that came here, they're the ones that left and fled Europe because it was so filthy. They're the ones that came here. They did not adapt to our culture, they did not adapt to our language, and next thing you know, 5 centuries later, we're the ones asking them for permission to be here. We're the ones speaking in their language. We're the ones that have been adapting to them for the last 5 centuries. And again, that is because of the process of colonization and genocide. And us in the Mexica movement, we are against these terms because we know that they are genocidal. In the long run, what they want to do is erase us. They want to keep us for our labor, keep us for our resources, but they want to deplete us from our indigenous culture and our indigenous sense of identity. And so we are saying this again, and we have tons of videos and tons of posters on this, but it is important because to this day, even so-called conscious people, even so-called people that have Nahuatl names, and even so-called professors that talk about decolonization, they still use the term Latino. They still use the term Hispanic. And they say that they're Mexican, that they're indigenous. But to us, it's like we can't accept that, because that is being hypocritical, that is dishonoring our ancestors, especially when you know the truth behind it. And a lot of people, they do not want to stop using them because they're getting paid. They're college professors and they don't want to rock the boat. It pays to sell out. It pays to use the term Latino. And even if you're conscious or whatever, you're still using it in your rap albums. You're still using it in your clothing line, whatever. And it's like, no, especially supposedly those of you that are awake, we're continuing to use these terms. It's ridiculous. And that's why us in the Mexica movement, we're not going to get tired of saying it. We're not Hispanic. We're not Latino. We are not the language of the Europeans. We are not the culture of the Europeans. We have our own culture, and our culture is Nicantlaca. Anything you want to add?
No, it's good.
I know it's a lot. So it's a lot, especially for those of our people that are very new to this. A lot of our people are like, oh, it makes sense. And a lot of us, I think, grow up with these terms and we don't really define them because our parents don't really define them. We don't really have the curiosity about it. But once we present this to our people, in the majority, it makes sense to our people. And they, oh yeah, that's true. That makes sense. because it does, but it's not being presented in a way that the majority of our people can access it, understand this, comprehend it, and take it on to be part of their daily life. And that's what we in the organization want. We want our people to get their identity, embrace their identity, and denounce and declare themselves Indigenous and denounce these colonial terms. Because again, we are not going to be defined by the colonizer. And they've done enough on our continent. We do not need to be identifying with who they are. So with that, anything else you want to add?
Yeah, just one thing. I mean, we encourage you to read, to look it up, because I mean, we're not just saying it. I mean, it's documented. It's like right there in print. Like, it tells you like what Latino's for, what it's used for, what it means. So, you know, we encourage you to study. If you don't believe us, like, it's out there. Different information is there. So, you know, we really promote studying and just learning, you know, and just researching our history on your own as well.
Exactly. For more information, we have a lot of this information on our website. This goes back to the Mexica handbook that only wrote in the early 90s. So that book really explains it. We have a lot of writing, a lot of essays, a lot of videos on YouTube. So check it out. Check out the website for more information. And remember, we're not Hispanic, we're not Latino, we're not raza, we're not mestizo. We are not the colonizer. We are the people who've been colonized. We are not the invader. We are the people who've been invaded. So with that, gracias Huitzilyolotl for appearing on this video. And I hope to bring you guys much more videos and to meet more of the members of the Mexica movement, because it's important for you guys to know we're not an online group. We're not just a Facebook. We're not a website. We are a group of people. We are a collective. We are a nonprofit. We've been in existence since the late 80s. And it's important for people to know who's behind this. And we are part of the Mexica movement. So any questions, comments, please shoot them my way, and we will try to get back to you as soon as possible. Citlalli and
Huitzilyolotl
from the Mexica movement. Stay Nicantlaca, stay beautiful.